This is a floodplain management plan. It's a community-based effort. When we say community, we are reaching out to the whole community and trying to understand the risk and the vulnerabilities of that whole community and work with that to come up with a strategy on how to manage flood risk within the city. Understanding what that flood risk is and how we can manage and become more resilient. Resilient is a new buzzword in emergency management in FEMA land. It's about becoming the ability to absorb shocks and stresses. And so how in a management context can we come up with strategies to make the city more resilient to flood? So that's kind of the overarching premise of this plan. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so what is a plan? This is an update. The city, following its progressive nature, has been very progressive as far as managing flood risk. This is the fourth update of this plan. The very first plan update was done or the first effort for this was done in 2005. Every 5 years since 2005, the city has gone through an update process. I've been fortunate enough to be associated with 3 of those. So when I say the city is progressive, it is. And, to actually have a hazard specific flood specific plan is progressive. And this plan follows a 10-step planning process that we'll touch on when we talk about some of the program drivers. It reviews risk. It takes a hard look at core capabilities and capacities to manage that risk and understand that risk. And then based on those capacities and capabilities and with overarching goals and objectives, it comes up with actions. And actions are, targeted for a time frame. The lifespan of every flood hazard management plan is 5 years. That might sound like a short planning horizon, but to really understand if we are reducing risk, you have to take periodic checks of risk and understand, okay, were we successful in buying down risk over a period of time? So that's kind of the purpose of this update. So we spent a lot of time looking at the past actions, what were done, what worked, what did not work, and then trying to tweak those actions for the next 5 years. Next slide, please. So why develop a plan? Why develop a flood specific plan? Well, the new mantra, and I think we're all seeing this and living it, on a day-to-day basis all over the country, is that, if it can rain, it can flood. And as we well know, the rain is happening. 5-10 years ago, the term atmospheric river was an unknown, man. We used to refer to things like the Pineapple Express, but atmospheric river was unknown. Prior to 2015, there was only 5 recorded atmospheric river events hitting the state of California. Over the last 5 years, we've averaged 10 to 15 a year. So if it can rain, it can flood. But in the history of LA, there has been a lot of floods that have happened. There's been over 33 state or federally related disaster declarations affecting the communities within Los Angeles County since 1950. Los Angeles County was declared a federal disaster area 8 times since 1982. We have had over 3,000 flood insurance claims filed in the city since 1980, totaling over $26.1 million in damages. So there's history. And when you have history of floods like this, that's when it's paramount that you understand why are we having the flood problems that we're having, and what can we do to try to manage those impacts. Next slide, please. Besides history, there's a lot of good reasons to do this, and we'll touch on these. Understanding risk so that we can communicate it. I coined the phrase last night when we were doing this meeting live about it takes a village to manage flood risk. And that's true, right? When we think about managing it, it's not feasible or even possible for the city to sit there and say, oh, we're going to assume all responsibility for managing flood risk, because like I said, there's no 100% solution. There's always residual risk. So making sure that property owners and employers and other stakeholders that have a stake in the outcome better understand what that risk is so they can take measures to protect themselves is just as important as identifying strategies on what the city can do. So we want to understand that risk and communicate it. We want to come up with ideas that, are holistic, that can be embraced by the whole community to reduce risk. And that all starts with understanding it. This plan will and have the ability to identify funding streams, and it can act as the key way to funds. There are specific programs out there where there are specific grants that the city can apply for flood hazard mitigation. And this plan can actually act as a key way to those funds. And last but not least, we are trying to foster collaboration against a whole myriad of stakeholders. When we start talking a little bit down the road about the process for which we're going through, you'll see that we have made a really diligent effort to engage as many stakeholders that have a stake in the outcome of this plan as possible. And that includes you all that are on the phone tonight. So there's a lot of other good reasons besides just the fact that floods happen. Next slide. Examples of strategies that could come out of this is, there's categories of mitigation that we want to do. It's not always about a structural solution. It is, you all that live in LA have seen probably the paramount structural solution over the years with the LA River project. That LA River project, as great as it has a project useful life, and it's coming to the end of its project useful life. And so decisions now have to be made as, okay, so now what? And so capital solutions are not always the best solution. So when we look at alternatives, we want to look at the different categories. Can we be better prepared through emergency management planning? Can we actually reduce exposure and vulnerability by looking at assets in harm's way, retrofitting? Can we look at our programmatic capabilities so that our risk doesn't increase over time with codes and standards? Can we, embrace nature-based solutions to actually help mitigate the flood risk? There's a lot of options that we want to do that gives us categories or swim lanes of strategies. And I think if you look at the existing plan, you'll see that the city did a really good job of looking cross, sector or cross, planning category as far as the different types of approaches. But we're not coming on in this with blinders on. We're not looking at just one faction. Oh, control, because it's not always most feasible or possible to control flood risk. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a program driver for this called the community rating system. Next slide. So the community rating system is a program that's by FEMA that is basically, I like to refer to it as a carrot and a stick incentive program. It's a voluntary program that communities that participate in FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. The National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, is a program that makes flood insurance available to participating communities in exchange for those communities agreeing to regulate development in identified flood hazard areas. It's a handshake agreement between the federal government and local communities. And that program's been around since 1978. And it's a very important program because flood is an excluded peril on almost all homeowner insurance policies. The private sector determined a long time ago that it's not cost effective for them to insure flood risk. And so the federal government stepped in and said, okay, if the private sector is not going to do that, we'll step in and create a program that can fund that. So under the National Flood Insurance Program, FEMA maps floodplains. Properties within those floodplains have certain requirements that if they're being developed or redeveloped or whatever, that the city has to enforce program codes and standards on. In exchange for the city doing that, insurance is now available. And there's a clause within the National Flood Insurance Program that says if you're getting any sort of federal assistance, either through the loan, being backed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FDIC, we always refer to them as the F loans. If you're in a floodplain, they're going to require you to have flood insurance. Or if something bad happens, like an earthquake or a flood or a fire, and you need disaster assistance, a condition of receiving that disaster assistance, if you're in a floodplain, is going to be buying flood insurance. The CRS actually says, hey, we're actually going to give incentive to communities for doing good floodplain management practices, and we can reduce the cost of flood insurance by cities doing good things. So there's a lot of really good incentives that are in the CRS program beyond just, reducing insurance, but it is pretty significant that when we look at what the exposure is in the city of LA, a program like this helping reduce the cost of this requirement. Next slide, please. So how do you benefit? Well, obviously, people that are in the floodplain that are buying flood insurance see their flood insurance costs reduced. And you can reduce your flood insurance costs under the CRS program by as much as 45%. Pretty significant. It's a classification system that's a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the best, 10 being not participating, and there's a corresponding rate reduction for every class. It promotes things like increased flood awareness, community-wide mitigation, improved public safety. There's 19 categories of activities that communities can voluntarily participate in and get credit for. The more credit you get under these programs, the higher your class, the better the discount. Next slide, please. So the city of LA has been in this program since 1991, and that's how I became familiar with it. I used to work for FEMA and administer the CRS program, and I got the city into the program back in 1991 because of all those reasons that we said, right? As far as it floods here. But you think about it, there's, some 7,000 flood insurance policies in the city of LA. As of October 1st, 2005, the city earned a Class 7 rating, which enables jurisdictions to have people, ratepayers, to have a 15% reduction on their insurance. So as of March 31st of this year, there were 7,100 and plus some change policies in effect. They're saving about $142,000 a year. That averages out to about $20 per policy. That might not seem like a lot, but the average policy nationwide is about $1,400 a year. If you start thinking about how much that is compared to what you're paying for your fire insurance or your personal property insurance, it's a big ticket. So $20 per policy on those, and it can vary. You can maybe, depending on what type of insurance coverage you have, you can see these discounts even carrying more weight than that, but it averages out to about $20 per policy. So important program, a part of this. One of the goals of this plan is to help the city try to improve its CRS class so that discount can go up. And we are optimistic that this plan will be the key way to doing so. Next slide, please. There's some other drivers of this that are CRS centric that is actually going to help the city become more resilient. We're going to be doing what's called a repetitive loss area analysis. A repetitive loss property is a property that's had 2 or more flood insurance claims paid in excess of $1,000 over a rolling 10-year period since 1978. And I know that sounds like a long-winded, definition, but really these are properties that have had repetitive flood loss and have had insurance claims paid. So FEMA tracks and monitors these list of properties. There's over 350 of these properties in the city. We're going to take an enhanced look at those properties and try to figure out what's causing the repetitive flooding. Why are we seeing repetitive flood claims? And some of these properties have had 3, 4, 5 claims. So we want to take a look at that. The interesting thing, when you look at where these properties are, a lot of them are outside the floodplain. And one would have to ask, why is a property outside the floodplain buying a flood insurance policy? Well, because it's flooding. And you don't have to live in the floodplain to be eligible for flood insurance. Anybody can buy a flood insurance policy as long as the community is participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. We're also going to take an enhanced look at natural floodplain functions, where we look at nature-based solutions, leveraging other commitments that the city has made through programs such as the LA River Master Plan. The city's general plan has an open space component to it that has targeted floodplains for open space preservation. So we want to build upon that and look at those plans and programs and see where there are integration points with this. And last but not least, and this is really kind of, I think, paramount, is a thing called a substantial damage response plan. The city is in the throes of response from a major event. And I think anybody who's on the phone knows what I'm talking about, having just recently experienced the wildfires. There's a clause under the National Flood Insurance Program that says communities that participate are required to do substantial damage determinations when damage occurs from any source, not just a flood. It can be an earthquake, it can be a fire, it can be a volcano, it can be a train accident. If something damages a property in a MAP floodplain, the city is obligated under the National Flood Insurance Program to determine if it's substantially damaged. Substantial damage is defined as any damages that exceed 50% of the market value of the structure before the event occurred. The whole idea behind this is to get buildings resilient, right? So if you have an opportunity because of significant damage to get a home more flood resilient through enforcement of your codes and standards, it makes sense. So we're actually doing a heightened look at substantial damage, which is really kind of important right now, especially as the city's recovering from this fire, because believe it or not, there were several homes, a lot of homes recently destroyed in that fire that were in the floodplain. So as those homes rebuild, there's a huge opportunity to get homes more resilient for future flood risk. So we're going to be doing a substantial damage component to this plan, which will actually add to the versatility of it.